Okay, so now you're getting attacked by the dragon and you have to scream at this tennis ball.
George R.R. Martin based House of the Dragon on a real generational-long familial war, with an incredible crew building massive set pieces, a dedicated cast plowing through injuries, and the bucking bronco that acts as a dragon stand-in. We have a lot to talk about here.
It's a different story with different actors, with sort of different people making it, with the same ambitions.
Number 1. It's a pretty big one.
You get that great call, which is the thing that every writer is hoping for, telling you we're going to go make this thing.
George R.R. Martin was actually pretty nervous about handing his work over to writer Ryan J. Condal and director Miguel Sapochnik.
And then you realize the responsibility that's on your shoulders.
He describes the feeling as handing your baby over to foster parents. But with his direct involvement and Ryan's promise to remain faithful to the world, George realized he found the best people to bring it to life.
There's always a little suspense to how good is it going to be, but I think I'm in good hands with Ryan and Miguel.
Number 2. They obviously used CGI for the dragons themselves. But the actors did get something almost as intimidating to react to.
We have this big buck, which is a bit like a bucking bronco, and it moves around and it's mechanical.
Not only do the Broncos move about, but there's also tons of wind being shot into the actors' faces. So the reactions to the dragon you'll see on screen are very linear to what's happening on set.
And they add our big, beautiful dragons on top of that in post-production.
Number 3. We have to talk about these wigs.
Oh my god, the wigs! It's a number to get into them.
Apparently, these wigs add an exponential amount of time spent in the makeup chair, but it's a mixed bag as far as how the actors feel about them. Some felt like the wig really brought out the authenticity in their character, while others just found them to be a hassle.
And then you've got all the, the battle scenes and where the wigs get destroyed from all the blood and the gunk.
Again, we're talking more time in the makeup chair.
You can just see the despair from the hair and makeup team.
Number 4. Of course there are going to be a few on-set mishaps with all those swords being swung around.
Our first rehearsal with Matt, I smashed him in the face with a sword.
Fabian Frankel is definitely a believer in the practice makes perfect method.
And I thought I was going to get fired pretty quickly.
Thankfully, he's had enough practice since that first rehearsal, and he's gotten a lot better at the battle scenes.
So yeah, getting better.
Number 5. Now that must have been a shock. Surprisingly, Olivia Cooke, who plays Alicent Hightower, hadn't watched Game of Thrones before she auditioned.
I realised that I had been auditioning with Cersei's scenes.
After getting cast and watching it, she was incredibly grateful that she hadn't seen it beforehand.
I was so happy I hadn't watched it, because I would have just mimicked absolutely everything that she had done.
Number 6. Not only did Matt enjoy a nice sword to the face, but he also suffered a much more serious injury to a disc in his neck. The injury took place during a stunt in Portugal, and he didn't even stop working. He just pushed forward despite being in severe pain throughout filming. He told The Hollywood Reporter, "It's a pain in the neck, literally, physically, and metaphorically." He was still in physical therapy months after the show had already wrapped.
It's a big challenge for all of us that have taken it on.
Number 7. There are quite a few things the actors still want to steal from the set.
Yeah, my knife, I wanted to keep it, but, they're very hot on that on the show.
One of the reasons they're so protective over all the props and costumes is because everything is custom made for the show.
All the costumes are bespoke. All the weapons are custom made for the show.
Everything you see, even the banners hanging from the wall, is specifically designed for that moment or scene.
We have a specific budget line item in season 2 for custom severed heads.
Number 8. Sorry, how many dragons? One of the first things Ryan J. Condal worked with Miguel Sapochnik on was differentiating all 17 dragons from one another. For about a year before filming started, utilizing various concept designers and, of course,
George, who writes very detailed books, gave us the gift of specifying color and size and age.
Ryan's method behind giving personalities to the dragon also depends on who is riding them, like Carexes.
He's always moving and flexing. He never sits still, much like his rider.
There are dragons that were designed we won't even get to see in season 1. Number 9. We're getting into the method behind the madness here. George R.R. Martin loosely based Game of Thrones on the War of the Roses. House of the Dragon is based on an earlier period in English history called the Anarchy.
I pilfered freely from real history.
When Henry I was left with only one child, his daughter Matilda, he made her his heir, but after he passed, the lords of the kingdom did not honor it. Her cousin Stephen came in and stole the treasury out from under her and got crowned king. This is where the storyline for House of Dragon comes into play.
Maud, or Matilda, she was known, and Stephen fought for a decade, 2 decades, whatever, yeah.
Number 10. Now this was neat. Something Ryan and Miguel were really impressed with were Emily Carey's ability to get into character through journaling. When we meet her character, Alicent, she doesn't have a mother.
There were some gaps that we had to fill, and so to sort of figure it all out, I just started journaling.
It was one of the most useful things she did to hone in on her character's story.
And with the advice of Miguel and Ryan, I managed to come up with some form of backstory.
Number 11. You'd be surprised how much was actually built practically.
I feel like no one told them that that isn't how films are made now, that you don't have to build the whole castle.
King's Landing was built completely from the ground up, and it was twice as large as anyone could have imagined it to be after reading the scripts.
You walk around these sets that look like ancient monuments and buildings with massive statues.
Number 12. Keep an eye out for the visionary behind this world. George R.R. Martin may randomly pop up in the series. He did do a cameo in the original Game of Thrones pilot, but unfortunately, they ended up reshooting most of the pilot.
So I was left on the cutting room floor.
He was also supposed to be a severed head, but that idea got nuked because they found out how expensive a custom severed head would be, so they decided to go a cheaper route.
They just bought a box of used severed heads.
Number 13. Adaptations are tricky. Ryan J. Condal found when it came to bringing this book to the screen, the most difficult thing was the way it was written. George R.R. Martin calls the novel a fake history book, so when you're reading it, there's not a lot of dialogue to go off of.
You have point A and point C, but you don't really know what point B was.
Another complicated aspect of it was how much time needs to be covered. The story goes on for generations.
It was figuring out how to structure it in such a way that we could move people through this very complex timeline.
Number 14. Let's just say it was a big cast. One thing George R.R. Martin loved about making this show was that HBO didn't limit him on how many characters were allowed in the story. In past reviews for Game of Thrones, critics would bash how many characters the show had and how hard it was to keep track of them.
I don't want to underestimate the intelligence of the audience or the readers. You can keep track of them.
Oftentimes, when turning a novel into a series, they end up having to eliminate or combine characters. George didn't want to do that.
The audience is more sophisticated than sometimes people making television is.
Number 15. Game of Thrones has always been all over the map. So it's safe to say House of the Dragon won't be any different. For the interior shots, they camped up at Leavesden Studios in England, with several outdoor shots in Cornwall, Devon, and Surrey, as well as European locations like Spain and Portugal. With an incredible writer, director, cast, and crew behind George R.R. Martin's legendary writing, we couldn't be more excited to devour everything House of the Dragon has to offer. What are you most excited to see?